User. Sparky. My wife and I have been married 24 years. She never showed much interest in music or listening to the radio. A few years back, she started showing signs of Alzheimer's. In July, I placed her in a care home. For the previous few months, I'd be listening to classic rock while I cooked supper. Occasionally, I'd ask if she knew who was playing. Sometimes she'd get it right, other times she wouldn't. About 2 weeks before I put her into the care home, we were playing Name That Tune, and she was hitting every single one, even naming the band. Then Janis Joplin came on. She said, "Oh, yeah, I know that one." She was singing that at Woodstock when I caught my boyfriend cheating on me and started walking back to the car. A few songs go by, and another one. "Yeah, I heard that at Woodstock too." She had never mentioned being at Woodstock in the 24 years we'd been together. Curious, I asked her about it. She said she had run away from home at 14 because of abuse from her father. I already knew that part of her life. While living in California with her boyfriend and another couple, they drove cross-country to Woodstock. She told me the song she heard and what she was doing at the time. From the time when she says they got there after dark the first day until the sun came up on the third day. Every song she mentioned was confirmed by multiple playlists online. It just blows me away that she had been at Woodstock and never once mentioned it the entire time we were together until then. I believe she had repressed the memories due to the abuse she had been through, and the Alzheimer's somehow unlocked that part of her brain and let the memories out. User. Calexia. I used to have a really cool coworker. He was fun to hang out with, always quick to laugh or help out or offer a word of support. Dude's awesome. I knew he had a crazy past and had been in jail before. No big deal. He eventually told me he has a murder charge dropped on his rap sheet that still occasionally gives him trouble with the police because it always makes them suspicious. One night, he and a group of friends went out partying. At one place, they came across another group and got into a verbal confrontation, but eventually they went their separate ways. Later, at another place, the other group happened to also be there, and at some point, someone from the other group snuck up and clubbed him on the back of the head, immediately knocking him out and leaving him in a pool of blood on the floor. In the ensuing brawl, someone from his friend group stabbed and killed someone from the other group, leading to everyone involved getting a murder charge. His was dropped because he was obviously unconscious the whole time, which everyone admitted to. All he remembered was talking one moment and the next waking up in a hospital bed with his mom crying and telling him he almost died. A bit of a shock when, as far as I know, the rest of his criminal record is just for graffiti. User. Manic Maker Studios. Not someone I was close to, but I found out my grandmother got pregnant with my mother when she was 15. My grandfather was in his late teens, early 22nd. Back then, when you got someone pregnant, you were expected to marry them and provide for them. So that's what my grandfather did. Proud husband to a 15-year-old pregnant bride. In a small town. Must have been awful. What was worse is that my grandfather resented being trapped into that arrangement and made sure to punish his family for not recognizing just how much he did for them. He was the kind of guy who went to work where everyone had to kiss his ass if they wanted a paycheck, and then he would come home and sit in his recliner in front of his TV and get angry if everyone wasn't, showing him proper respect as a provider. His wife, his children, and then the grandchildren he had to raise after he ruined his own children were all just parasites to him. He earned the money, we just spend it. My grandmother died when she was 49. She developed an eating disorder long before I was born, and if it weren't for the calories she got from beer every day, she would have died of undernutrition in her 30 seconds. It starts when you fuck and make the baby before you're an adult to care for it, and it goes downhill from there. My grandmother was a miserable cunt, and I hated her my whole life until I found out about how her adult life started. She was still a cunt, but I was at least able to develop a bit of empathy and compassion for her. She deserved better than the asshole she got stuck with. Nameless Ghoul 661. So, about 5 months after my grandmother's passing, my cousin kept getting a call from this lady that was asking about her mom, my grandmother, and she said that my grandmother was her mother. Not sure how everything really came together, but it turned out that she was actually my mom and aunt's half-sister. My grandmother always talked about the godly side of her life, wait till marriage and stuff, but never mentioned about having a daughter before my mom and aunt. Respectfully, I understand the amount of stress she would have been in from my grandfather, but it had turned out she was with a guy in college and had a kid, but ended up giving her up for adoption after my great-grandfather had forced her to since she was 16 at the time. And seeing the pictures of her first daughter are scarily similar to my grandmother, and it's like looking at a picture of her. Haven't met her yet, despite it's been 2 years, but she's been wanting to hear stories from everyone. And it sucks not meeting your actual mom and finding out years later that she's passed away. And I'm sure my family has told her about her mom. But one day I'll eventually meet her and tell her everything, even show her pictures. And for context, I was close to my great-grandfather and my grandmother before they passed away. So this is my surprising or shocking thing I discovered from someone I was really close to. User, backs and alcohol. My dad hid a drug addiction from me and my siblings for a long time. I remember getting some pain pills after I had a tooth removed, and suddenly they were all gone. Only person in the house was him, and everything came out after that. I was maybe 11. User, backs and alcohol. My dad hid a drug addiction from me and my siblings for a long time. I remember getting some pain pills after I had a tooth removed, and suddenly they were all gone. Only person in the house was him, and everything came out after that. I was maybe 11. User. Standidal, a relative, mentioned he has killed someone once. He was drunk and very tearful and kind of blurted it out. He was very, very regretful. He was older than me, the same age as my parents. I knew he was a former member of an infamous Irish terrorist group and knew he had done some crazy stuff in the name of fundraising for the cause, but didn't know about that. Some of the older relatives did know, I think, because they were around during his active service career. Anyway, it was very sad. My family, all being emotionally crippled Irish, never spoke of it afterwards. User. Estrogen. My mom once shrieked, "I hope you don't get molested like I was," because I asked her to drop me off extra early for my middle school's choir concert. That's how I found out my mom got felt up by one of her parents' friends when she was a teen. It was the 60s, so my grandmother successfully talked my grandfather down from absolutely murdering the man. Good job, Grandma, letting that douchebag get away with touching your kid. I hope everyone was happy with that decision. Gotta keep that status quo. User. My mom once shrieked, "I hope you don't get molested like I was," because I asked her to drop me off extra early for my middle school's choir concert. That's how I found out my mom got felt up by one of her parents' friends when she was a teen. It was the 60s, so my grandmother successfully talked my grandfather down from absolutely murdering the man. Good job, Grandma, letting that douchebag get away with touching your kid. I hope everyone was happy with that decision. Gotta keep that status quo. User. Brub1. I found out the friend of a friend of mine won the lottery some years ago, like one of the multi-state ones, 9 figures, all that. I got to hang out at his manse a few times. It was gigantic, like 12K square feet, indoor pool, full bar, elevator, the works. Every time I went over, even if it was just for an afternoon football game with the guys, he always had these insanely beautiful women about half our age hanging out in a bikini or whatever. They looked like the girls you'd see on Instagram wearing designer dresses and hanging out on yachts. I found out after our mutual friend drunkenly told me one day. He said he won in the low 9 figures, but he claimed he had since invested it and now has even more. User, this is my clean user. My father's mother, whom died before I was born, was my grandfather's mistress. When my aunts tried to get each of their marriage licenses, they discovered their last name was different than their parents'. Turns out they were both products of a long-term affair. My grandmother was 15 years younger than my grandfather, and they had left the state after the oldest daughters were born. Abandoning his wife and daughters, they changed the spelling of his last name and married in my home state under the new name. Both grandparents died before I was born, so I found out from one of my aunts. My mom and my sister are the only members of the family to meet my grandfather's first family after he tried to reconcile with them before he passed. My father hates the family crest I have at my home, which shows the spelling of our last name before his father changed it. He hated it so much he researched our ancestors and found that our current spelling is the original spelling from our ancestor that came to the States in the 1700s. User. Darcy Mackenzie. I'm not sure this exactly fits, but close to. My parents found out in their early 30 seconds that they were distant cousins. They only found out because my great-grandfather was doing genealogical research. Turns out that both sides of the family lived in a small rural town some generations back with some intermarriage. My maternal grandmothers independently, i.e. they didn't know each other at the time as far as I know, ended up married and raising kids in another small town an hour away, one in the country and one in the city. My parents met in the one high school and went to the prom together but lost touch. They met up again in university and got married. Because of the way the original intermarriages worked, my sister and I are actually cousins with my parents too. I can locate myself twice on the family tree my maternal grandmother made.